So I learned to look up this guy's class schedule, and I just avoided going to the copy machine when he was teaching. So I could see him back there with his face, facing us. He was staring at us. And he would wait for me to finish with the other students. And then he would come up to me and stand this close and ask his questions. But then he wrote me long, long emails. I think if I printed them out, I think there were 2 or 3 of them. And I think if I printed them out, they would have been like 10 pages long, single spaced. It was crazy. Red flags everywhere. Rumor had it that he had pornography on his work computer. Why is this guy looking for where I live? This is crazy. You're a scientist. You're studying to be a PhD. There's no way you should have to worry about straightening your hair or curling your eyelashes. Actually, he was so mad that I thought he was going to push me down the stairs. He stayed behind in class and asked me out. And I thought, what are you doing? It's the first day of class. And he stayed in my class the whole semester. It was crazy. It's hard to explain, how this can just chip away at your self-esteem, or through the years you just start to feel diminished or lessened as these things go on. As a woman begins to embark on a career in the sciences or math or anything like that, oftentimes one of the things that is discussed is the fact that through the years she's probably going to have to endure some level of harassment. My first instinct when these things are discussed is that I haven't really experienced a lot of harassment. But then I thought, actually, I have a little bit here and there. And then I started to write down and list all of the incidents. And I thought, oh, through the years, I've actually experienced a lot of harassment. So I want to talk about that today. A few caveats before I begin. Most of the situations that I'm going to discuss, I was not actually unsafe, but rather uncomfortable. There were some situations where I was genuinely unsafe. I felt very much threatened. But most of the situations were sort of embarrassing or humiliating, or they created a workplace or a study situation where I had to sort of work around somebody or work around a situation. And even that, even in times when I didn't feel unsafe, but just sort of felt uncomfortable, that still to me feels like it's a lot to have to put up with when all you want to do is, get your work done, get your studying done or whatever. You don't want to have to put up with embarrassment or humiliation or being harassed in any way, shape, or form. And, to be clear, none of these things would have happened if I were a dude. Another caveat is none of these situations happened at my current institution. And I don't just say that because I want to keep my job. I say that because it's the simple truth. And I've said this before. I said this in my TED Talk. There's still work to be done. Don't get me wrong. Every workplace probably has work to do when it comes to trying to allow for equity and inclusion, of course. But in my experience, this has been the best workplace, and a lot of that work was already laid out before I got to the school. And you start to recognize once you're in a workplace like that, oh, that was what was missing at that last place that I was at. In this place, we have, women in high levels in the school. We have people of color at high levels. These are people who are making decisions, who are writing policy and making sure that these kind of things are paid attention to. When it comes down to it, that's what you need. You need women and people of color in high positions. Those kind of hiring decisions, those kind of promotion decisions, in my opinion, are what allow a culture to be more problem-free, or at least if you ever have a problem, you can be a little bit more assured that there's going to be somebody at a high up level who's going to listen to you and maybe do something to try to resolve it. It's less likely to happen if you are dealing with administrators, for example, who have never experienced these kind of situations. It's hard to explain, how this can just chip away at your self-esteem, or through the years you just start to feel diminished or lessened as these things go on. So it's helpful to have people in leadership positions who've also experienced these things. It just makes sense. You've got to have these people in leadership. And as I'm writing down all these issues, that I've experienced through the years, I have this weird feeling like I'm going to get in trouble for talking about them. As I kind of analyze that feeling, I don't think it's that I think I'm going to get in trouble, but this is a certain amount of putting myself out there. And it is a vulnerable spot to be in. Somebody could leave a dismissive comment saying something like, oh, cry me a river, social justice warrior, feminist garbage, that kind of stuff, which at the end of the day, it doesn't hurt me at all for somebody to say that. And I have to remember that they don't get to write my story. And we're coming to the point now where enough women are telling these kind of stories that it feels more of a community in that way. I don't have to worry about anybody who's going to dismiss this or say that it's nonsense. It's not nonsense. I assure you it's not nonsense. Coming up through undergrad, I was a biology major, and I will definitely say that I did not experience any kind of issues. Many of my professors were women and people of color. Many of my fellow students were women and people of color, and I didn't really have any issues at all. In grad school, however, the department that I was a part of, and a lot of things have changed. A lot of the problem characters are no longer there in the department, but there was a lot of inappropriate interactions. I wouldn't say that I will talk about one specific incident in a moment, but I wouldn't say that the actual culture of the department was harassing in any way, but there was a lot of inappropriate interactions between the grad students, consenting adults, we were all, like mid to late 20s, and the professors in the department. I knew somebody who slept with somebody on their committee. Highly, highly unethical. I knew somebody who made out with their own advisor. These are not good situations. We all kind of knew about these things. Everybody knew about them. But, so it created this atmosphere where only some professors, only some male professors, you really couldn't get a decent audience with them to answer your questions unless, if you were a woman, you couldn't get an audience with them unless you were, like you put yourself together. You straightened your hair or you wore a short skirt. It's so weird to say these things, but you shouldn't have to worry about, you're a scientist, you're studying to be a PhD. There's no way you should have to worry about straightening your hair or curling your eyelashes. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. There was one particular professor who liked to go out and watch the sunset with cute grad students. And it just felt very, like it wasn't, I don't know. I don't really know what to say about that. The culture was not entirely professional. That is for sure. It just wasn't entirely professional. Anybody who was in the same program with me at that time would agree. Yeah, there were some problems like that. There were some incidents. Okay, so that was kind of the culture that we were dealing with. It was kind of a party atmosphere, but sometimes verging on, a little too much inappropriate interaction. The one incident that I did want to discuss that directly affected me, it wasn't anybody in my actual department. It was somebody in a program who was in a different school, but it was close to our program. So this fellow student would come over and hang out with us. That wasn't unusual. There was a lot of interaction between different programs. But this guy would come in and he would sit next to always women who were, doing their research. We'd be sitting at a rig for several hours trying to collect data, or we'd be fixing tissue, for example. And those are kind of boring, tedious tasks. So we'd be sitting at a bench for a while doing these kind of things. He'd sit right next to us, chit-chatting away. And that also wasn't that unusual. People would sit down, but he would do it for a long time. So the first kind of pink flag with this guy was that he was just coming all the time and sitting next to women grad students and just interacting with us for long periods of time. It's not at the level where you could yell at somebody and say, knock it off, get out of here, because technically a lot of people would chit chat and sit next to people. It was just the excessive time. So the next pink flag, well, this was a red flag. He walked me out to my bike one time. I was living in Chicago. I did not have a car, but I biked everywhere. He walked me out to my bike, so he saw what my bike looked like. And he knew that I lived in a particular neighborhood in Chicago. And one day, he came to my neighborhood and walked up and down the streets and found my bike chained to the front of my apartment building on this side street. It was not like a main street, a side street of this neighborhood in Chicago. And he left a note on my bike. So I came out in the morning. He must have left it in the evening or the night before, because I came out in the morning and there's a note from him. And that was a red flag in my opinion. I'm like, why is this guy looking for where I live? This is crazy. So at that apartment, I was actually living with my partner at the time, and we ended up splitting up. I moved out, and because I missed a couple of days of school, everybody kind of understood, oh, okay, Maggie is not in today because she's moving out, she's having these problems. Everybody was, I'm sure, gossiping about it. So this guy definitely heard about it. And when I came in the next time, I was just, emotionally drained and physically tired from the moving my furniture and everything. And I could tell that he was going to come in and he was going to ask me out. I could just tell he sat next to me with like a specific purpose. He was going to ask me on a date. And I was trying, I did not have the emotional bandwidth at that point to be polite. So I was trying to just deter him from asking the question, and he just wasn't picking up on any hints. And then sure enough, he asked me very specifically and formally on a date, and I was not kind. I said, kind of shouted at him a little bit, and I was like, no. And then I was like, I'm sorry, but I know. I think he left pretty quickly after that, but then he wrote me long emails. I think if I printed them out, I think there were 2 or 3 of them. And I think if I printed them out, they would have been 10 pages long, single spaced. It was crazy. Red flags everywhere. And then a few days after that, I came out to find that my bike had been messed with in a kind of a dangerous way. And I never reported any of this stuff, because what are you going to say? Instinctively I knew if I reported, they would be asking me for evidence. I don't have any specific evidence other than these long emails and the note left on my bike and then my bike getting messed up. I didn't have any evidence for anything, so I knew I didn't report him to campus. Now that I look back, I probably should have anyway, but you'll see in a little bit why women don't always report everything. And there is reasons for that. So then, as I continued on with grad school, I began teaching sometimes independent classes. I had a few students ask me out, which I just think that's a little inappropriate. They had no reason to think that I was interested in going out with them. To be clear, I never dated any students ever. That's highly unethical and inappropriate, of course. I had one student hand his final exam to me, and he asked me out as he handed it in. I thought, well, that's not so bad, because now that you've finished my class, I no longer am going to be your teacher, so so that wasn't so. I did decline, but it wasn't so bad. But I had one student ask me out on the first day of class. He stayed behind in class and asked me out, and I thought, what are you doing? It's the first day of class. And he stayed in my class the whole semester. It was crazy. Y'all, crazy. But, all of this stuff was when I was younger. I was in my 20s. Sometimes I was actually younger than the students that I was teaching. I don't know. I don't know if that's inappropriate, but it's something that I feel like if I wasn't a woman, I don't think it would have happened. I don't know. Do dudes get asked out by their students? I'm not sure. Anyway, all that stuff finished when Dave put a ring on it, I never had any more offers after that time. I should have just worn a ring the whole time. Now I realize that. Okay, so my next incident, I was at, now to be clear, I taught at many, many different institutions. During the 4 years between my official faculty positions, I actually taught at many different schools. So I'm trying not to implicate any particular place. But here's one. There was one place where I was a faculty member, and the photocopy machine was right next to a classroom. It was in such a position that the person teaching that class would be able to look out and see who was at the copy machine. And there was one professor who would look out and see that it was me. He would stop his class and he would start talking to me. His students are sitting there staring at me, and this guy is just having like a conversation with me. It was like a loud voice that he was using. I don't think he really shouted anything inappropriate, but it was like this small talk that he was having randomly. He didn't even come to the door. Like he would shout out from, oh my God. So I learned to look up this guy's class schedule, and I just avoided going to the copy machine when he was teaching. I actually did complain about that, and the people that I complained to were like, it was basically like, oh, well, what can you do? And that guy, by the way, was fired at one point. Rumor had it that he had pornography on his work computer. So the last incident I want to talk about was the worst, the most egregious situation that I had to deal with. Listen to this one. I had a student who, I wouldn't say that he was a stalker. He wasn't like that guy back in grad school, but he was kind of like had a menacing air about him. He would stand this close to me. He would stand this close to me to ask questions. I've never had a student stand so close to me to ask questions. He also had this habit of when class let out at the end of the day, he would stand at the back of the classroom, and I could see him out of the corner of my eye as I was talking to other students. I could see him back there with his face, facing us. He was staring at us. And he would wait for me to finish with the other students, and then he would come up to me and stand this close and ask his questions. There was just something about that and his general demeanor that I thought, I'm not sure I'm entirely safe. The other part of it was that this was an evening class. It let out at 10 p.m. It was dark as I left the building every time. So this was actually the only time of all these incidents, this is the only time that I actually formally complained. So what I did was I basically said, okay, I don't really know what campus security does per se, to be fair, but the one thing that they say that they do is to walk students or faculty members out to their car at the end of the day, if it's requested of them. So I thought, well, I've never really asked for this before, but let me call up security, or I stopped over or whatever, and I was like, hey, I was wondering if on this, Tuesday and Thursday evening when I teach, if you could just come by my classroom at 10 p.m. and walk me out to my car. They were outraged by the request. They were outraged. Their first thing was, why are you feeling threatened? What is this about? They basically didn't believe the things that I was saying. They didn't believe that I felt threatened. They thought I was making it up, or that it really wasn't that serious. And truth be told, it might not have been that serious, but I've kind of learned to listen to my instincts through the years. Sometimes when something presents itself as a threat, it might actually be a threat. Like, we've seen enough evidence of this. So I was like, just to be on the safe side, can you just walk me out to my car and then stop asking me all these follow-up questions and clearly disbelieving me? That'd be great. They told me I had to fill out a police report. I said, what? So I had to put the students, I said, okay, if that's what I have to do to get you to walk me out to my car, okay. Filled out the police report. I had to put the student's name down. They told me that they wouldn't notify him, but I still had to file the report. I said, okay. And then they started walking me out to my car. And I would say it happened about 3 nights where they would kind of show up around 10 p.m., walk me out to my car. And they definitely didn't seem to be super happy to be doing this. Again, I don't know what campus security does, but I thought a big part of their job was making sure, especially women, students and women professors would feel safe. I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, probably the third or fourth day that this happened, it's 10 p.m., and the security officer comes in to walk me out to my car. Hadn't met this one before. He was furious. And he waited for all my students to leave, including, by the way, that same student. And then he starts just peppering me with questions. It was all the same questions that I had to answer in the first place. Why do you feel threatened? What are you talking about? What is the student doing specifically? Can you describe it? I had to answer all the same questions again. And then he was still furious. Like he was not okay with this task that I was asking him to do. And we had to walk down a back stairway to get to the parking lot. And he was so mad that I thought he was going to push me down the stairs. Like, well, that's enough of that. Like, the campus security is making it worse. They're making me feel even more unsafe than I did before. So I either called or emailed the campus security the next day, and I said, we don't have to do this task anymore. Don't worry about it. And I don't think they even emailed me back, but if they did, it was something very perfunctory, like, okay, sounds good, and no follow-up questions, no reason, like they didn't ask why. So then what I did was I just went ahead and asked like 3 or 4 of my women students to stay behind so we could all walk out to our cars together. Because I still didn't feel safe with the student. Like the problem had not gone away. So I just figured my own way around it. And I found some students who were willing to do that. And it was a good solution to the problem that I probably should have thought of in the first place. But I don't know. I thought campus security would help me. Whatever. I don't know. So again, just to reiterate, most of these situations were not specifically unsafe. Even the ones where I felt unsafe, maybe they weren't that unsafe, but I genuinely felt unsafe in those moments. And the ones that were not unsafe situations, certainly it was embarrassing. They were humiliations and unprofessional. And I just feel like I shouldn't have to put up with that, And again, now that I'm in a culture at a school where I don't have any of those issues at all, not a single one of those issues, it's a breath of fresh air. And I'm thinking, well, this is the future for us. This is the future. But it takes creating a culture where women are in charge. Maybe you have women as part of your security force. Like, actually, that is true at my school too. Now that I think about it, the campus security has a good number of women working there. I think, hopefully, I won't have any more of those issues in the future. I'm not the only woman that these kind of things have happened to. Just these, little, like, incident after incident after incident, just so infrequently and so subtle that it's only after years of them happening that you look back and you say, gosh, have I really had to put up with this nonsense? Why? Why have I had to put up with this nonsense? And none of us should have to deal with it. None of us should have to deal with any of this stuff. Let's hope it all goes away. Let's hope that men start learning a better way.